Welcome back, friends. Welcome back to Solutions Watch. I'm James Corbett of CorbettReport.com. It is May of 2023, and I'm going to assume that if you are tuned into Solutions Watch, it is because you are looking for a better way to find health, a better way to live in harmony with your environment and with nature, a better way to find community with other people, a better way forward with technology and all of the problems that we are facing. And if you are looking for a better way, boy, do I have a conference for you. It is conveniently titled A Better Way Conference, and it will be taking place in Bath in the UK from the 1st to the 4th of June 2023. And you can find out all the details about that conference, including the great roster of people who will be speaking there, including, let me check my notes. Oh, that's right, me. Yes, I will be one of the speakers at the Better Way Conference, so I hope, if for no other reason, you might be interested in it for that, but many, many other speakers that I think will be of interest to regular Corbett Reporters in the crowd. Once again, that is at betterwayconference.org, and don't worry if that's a mouthful. Obviously, it will be linked up in the show notes. So in order to talk about this conference, what it involves, and what you can expect there, today we're going to be talking to, well, one of the people responsible for this conference, Dr. Tess Lawrie, who, as some people might know, is a medical doctor and a research consultant based in the UK. She is the CEO of evidence-based medicine Consultancy, and she sits on the steering committee of the World Council for Health at worldcouncilforhealth.org. She is at drtesslawrie.substack.com, and I'm sure she'll probably be familiar to a lot of my audience, but if not, let's bring her on and introduce her. Dr. Lawrie, thank you very much for your time today.
Well, thanks very much for inviting me, James. It's a real pleasure to be here and speaking with you, and I've been aware of your work for the past 3 years, and you've always been ahead of the curve, so it's a real pleasure to be on your show today.
It's one of those things where I very much wish I was wrong. Unfortunately, in this particular instance, it did not turn out that way. So let's talk about that. Obviously, the reason that we are here talking is about the Better Way Conference, but why do we need a better way? Well, it's clearly because the path that we are heading down is not one that a lot of people want to be on right now. And as you know, my audience will be very, very aware of that agenda, the biosurveillance agenda and everything else along with it that is hurtling towards us down the tracks. So this is a story that lots of people have different inroads to, and a lot of people have really just started to fall down the rabbit hole, as it were, in the past few years and discovered that the world is not what they thought. So I'd be interested to hear your own journey, because what I understand, you have worked maybe not in, but with the belly of the beast, aka the World Health Organization. Let's talk about your experience of coming to an understanding of where we are in the world right now and what's really happening.
Yeah, well, I would say that my sort of realization that things didn't work was in 2017. When I've always worked really hard, but certainly I was on this treadmill of producing documents, doing this guideline methodology. It's called guideline development, clinical practice guideline development, and with the World Health Organization and other organizations. So I was always an external consultant to the WHO, but I had a sort of I had ongoing contracts from around 2012. It just felt like we weren't making any difference. Certainly work-wise, we weren't making any difference. And I could see that the world didn't work outside of work either, because, two-parent family, both working like crazy or really just on a treadmill, not having any influence really over one's children. I was traveling a lot for work, and I was really questioning the meaning of life and just thinking, this can't be it. Nothing works. It just gets harder and harder the faster you run. And so I was in, I would say 2019, 2020, really reconsidering my working role as well. And then when the so-called pandemic was launched, I knew that it didn't make sense in any way, and that there must be something else going on. I didn't know exactly what it was, but I knew that there wasn't the evidence to support the WHO strategies, which then became sort of global strategies. There wasn't the evidence to support a call for a pandemic. There wasn't the evidence to support these so-called vaccines, which are not, which, as you know, are genetic injections. But I didn't know what I could do to help. I felt like many people powerless to help. How does one's just an ordinary person, and there's so much going on that's evidence, and so much that one doesn't know. And so I started outsourcing some of my work so that I could take a sabbatical. I wanted to look particularly into 5G because I was aware that it was a technology that hadn't been well researched, and there were questions about safety. And it was while I was doing that a review, well, in actual fact, I saw Dr. Pierre Corey speaking about ivermectin in front of the state Senate in the US. And I thought, this is absolutely ridiculous that a doctor of his caliber should be having to beg politicians to use a safe old medicine. And I thought, well, I can do this. This is my scope of my area of expertise. Let me do a systematic review and just see what the evidence on this is. And it was clear that ivermectin was, there was absolutely no reason why it should be withheld and why it was being called unsafe. It should have been used immediately. And then, of course, I was monitoring the adverse event database, the World Health Organization's VIGI-Access database, to see the emerging evidence on the COVID-19 injections. And, at the time in January 2021, when they were saying there isn't enough evidence on ivermectin, and ivermectin had been used billions of times, and it had about 5,000 adverse event reports on their database. At that time, there were already 80,000 or so, reports of vaccine harms, COVID vaccine harms. And so, but I knew that nobody would listen to me if I started, shouting about that. But I certainly could shout about ivermectin. And so I established an initiative called the British Ivermectin Recommendation Development Group. And I prepared an evidence to decision framework and followed the WHO process independently I called a meeting, a guideline development meeting, and I held a process whereby I had Pierre Corey and a whole lot of other experts. I think we had about 15 countries represented, and we reached the conclusion that ivermectin worked and should be used. And we sent this recommendation and the documents and the evidence to the FDA and the CI and the NIH and the UK authorities, the World Health Organization, and so on. And at that stage, I kind of knew full well they were just going to ignore it because I had evidence of corruption, which you may or may not be aware. But I recorded a meeting that I had with Dr. Andrew Hill. And he was a WHO consultant hired by UNITAID, which is a Gates-funded organization, and where he said that he had not been his conclusions had been influenced by the sponsor, the unnamed sponsor, and so I sort of knew what we were up against, and we held our first conference. It was called the International Ivermectin for COVID Conference, and that was in April 2021. And in the closing speech I gave at that conference, I said, we actually need a people's organization that's free of conflicts of interest. And I didn't really realize at the time that this was even possible, and it just seemed such a big thing to try and conceive. And then, I started writing reports on the vaccine harms, the evidence that we were just seeing on the databases, and that was ignored, sent to various quarters. And colleagues from around the world started saying, well, when are we going to make this organization? And so we did. We started very small in the September of 2021. And we, in December, we'd already released our first campaign, which was to cease and desist the COVID-19 vaccinations. And I believe that we were the first organization to really call for that there were so many that we were still afraid to say anything about the COVID vaccines. It was really, really peculiar. And then in May last year, we held the Better Way conference because we realized that in actual fact, people were so fearful to get through, and in actual fact, just to survive and thrive, we are going to need solutions. And so we held the, and in the meantime, just to say that I ceased the work with the WHO and have been really full-time committed to this cause now. And the World Council of Health is an initiative of a community interest company, which is a non-profit style company based in the UK that we formed in March 2021 for this whole exercise. We didn't know where it was going to lead us, but that's how we are run, and we're funded by donations, and that's it. We have no big corporate sponsors or anything. So the Better Way Conference 2022 actually served two purposes. It was a success, and so it actually funded us for 3 months, which was amazing, and we're hoping that this year we'll do the same. And but also it was the most amazing opportunity for people to really come together, because at that point people had been locked down, they'd been traumatized, and had lost loved ones, and to come together in person. It was really the first in-person conference, I can say, internationally, that was really looking at solutions. And we had we basically just asked 7 questions, and the way we designed it made it really interesting and interactive, because we had 7 panels, and the first panel was, how do we reclaim science? We had another panel on how do we solve the problem of captured media and restore journalistic integrity. We looked at what are the environmental issues and how can we solve these, challenges. And so, and also, law and human rights. What are the challenges with human rights and law right now? And we had a really diverse group of people coming together. Representatives from grassroots organizations, doctors who'd been speaking out but not being heard, who'd been treating patients, and so on. So, and it was a solutions-focused thing. So each panel, the people were tasked with coming with solutions. You couldn't just come and present something, bleak. We all sort of knew that we knew the bleak stuff. We just didn't have the solutions. And so it was a 3-day conference. It was so uplifting, so connecting. Everybody who attended just felt really restored and rejuvenated. And when we distilled the essence of the conference down, what had come out of it was actually this document, it's the Better Way Charter. We'd endeavored to sort of take notes, and we were going to prepare a big document on the output of the conference, and we ended up just sharing this. Well, we shared the document, but that was basically it. And it basically is a charter that of universal principles, how to get along in the world and how we all work together when we've been so polarized and we've forgotten how to get along, we've forgotten who we are, we've forgotten we're part of nature, and that we thrive together. So, and that we need to act in honor. So basically, but also it does very firmly state that we don't tolerate the violation of inalienable rights and freedoms, and we don't tolerate profit, power, and influence coming before people and the planet. And also, and just to say that, we use technology with discernment, and then it must benefit people and the planet. So that was the output of last year's conference. And this year, we're moving on from that. This year we have really, the title of the conference is Unveiling a Better Way for Health, Freedom and Sovereignty. And I think many people think, well, the World Council for Health is trying to be another World Health Organization. And we certainly don't need that. Our position is we are a grassroots organization. We don't impose anything. Everything we have is information and evidence and actions coming from the grassroots. And we stand for health, freedom, and sovereignty, because you cannot dissociate health from freedom and sovereignty. So So, yes, where was I? I'm just rambling on, aren't I? Just interrupt me at any time.
That is a good start to this conversation. So let's flesh that out a little bit. As you say, there was the conference last year, 2022, and you came up with the Better Way Charter. But tell us about some of the speakers there and what took place there amongst the people who actually attended.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I mean, the first conversation was just like fireworks. I mean, it was because we didn't, we were all for open conversation, sharing ideas, agreeing to disagree. It's not like we're trying to homogenize everything. And the first conversation, we had Del Bigtree as the MC of the event. And then we had, I would say, celebrity podcast hosts like yourself hosting the panels. And the speakers would speak for sort of 10 to 15 minutes each. We were quite strict with time. And then they joined the panel and there was a discussion. So the first panel was on how do we reclaim science. We had Brett Weinstein in that panel. We had Robert Malone, and we had Geert van den Bosch. And, they certainly, Geert and Robert have quite fixed views on things. Del Bigtree has quite a different perspective to the scientists. And it was really wonderful. It ended up being about 3 hours or more. Because there was just so much discussion and tension at times, but it was really fabulous, and it was great afterwards just to see everyone shaking hands and patting each other on the back and saying, well, that was really great and interesting, and all still friends, and I think it was a great example of how we move forward in these open spaces and open discussion. We also had, and there were just wonderful moments, Dan Aston Gregory, I don't know if you know him, but he is a podcast host and I mean, he has other life before being a podcast host. He's got Elevate Network in the UK. I think many people had different lives before COVID. He was on one of the last panels where we were talking, about, an integrative health approach, new approaches to health. And he was just saying how wonderful it was being all together and how he actually ended up getting everyone dancing, in the last panel, because he was just saying he'd always been afraid to speak up, and he'd sort of found his courage there. And it was wonderful that he'd actually managed to share that. And he said, now that I've found my courage, I'm not putting it back again, or something like that.
I suppose that must have been part of the context of that conference, because if you can cast your mind back to those bygone days of 2022, we were still largely ensconced in the scamdemic narrative, and even international travel was still a big deal at that time. So I assume that was part of the act of coming together was itself somewhat transgressive.
Yeah, it was very transgressive because we were labeled as anti-vaxxers, and our first venue was actually cancelled. It was pulled 2 weeks before we were scheduled, and we had to scramble around finding another venue with speakers coming from all over the world and people coming. So there was that. Plus, there was still masking and all sorts of stuff going on, and the fear. And a lot of people were afraid from a security point of view of going anywhere too, because they were afraid of being targets. So it was brave of everybody, and it went off just like a dream. It was so wonderful. And once there, nobody was worried at all. There was such a great vibe. There was no concern or fear. And it was.
Let's talk about the conversations that are planned for this year's event then, because there is quite a range of interesting topics here that I think, again, for people who are watching Solutions Watch, I think they will be interested in most of these conversations. Conversation 1, from Big Pharma to Real Health. Conversation 2, from fake foods to food as medicine. Conversation 3, from AI and transhumanism to being human. Conversation 4, from electrosmog to nature's frequencies. Conversation 5, from climate change to nature nurture. Conversation 6, from thought control to free thought. Conversation 7, from One Health to Our Health. And Conversation 8, from scarcity to abundance. Very interesting. How did you come up with that list of topics?
Well, I'm sure all of your subscribers and viewers are aware then that, what we're up against. And I would say for the first conference, we'd only had an inkling. And we were pushing back against the WHO. We had our Stop the WHO campaign. We had a panel discussing the WHO, the World Health Organization. But it's really only since then that the full, with these amendments to the international health regulations, these increasing sort of framework of control, the legal framework of control that's being negotiated or not even discussed around the world at the moment. So we've learned a lot, and we've realized that, as I said, you can't dissociate health from freedom and sovereignty, and that there are many different ways that we as human beings are being assaulted at the moment. Be it by and attempted to be controlled and enslaved. So be it by the threat, imminent threat, and perhaps already part and parcel of our existence, the transhumanism and this push for AI. Environmentally, we've got 5G and electrosmog being rolled out all over the place. And also we have a speaker on chemtrails. We have a speaker speaking about the chlorine oxide, how to clean up these vinyl chloride spills. So, and that's also, there've been all those toxic spills, and there's been no one talking about these things. So, speaking about climate change and how it's part of the agenda, it's being used to keep us, locked up in our homes and so on. So, and the expanding power, scope of the WHO and its controllers, to have this one health approach where animals and the environment and everything has to be controlled and controlled centrally, and that we are a threat to other species on the planet. So there's so much to talk about, and it's in many ways you can have a conference on any one of those topics, but we are running it like last year, where we give speakers 10 minutes to share their unique expert perspective, and then they join the panel of 7 peers and they thrash it out, and then there's a host who will bring the best out of them and ask probing questions, so that people can really see the range of perspectives and how, it's unlikely that any one person is 100% correct on any one thing at the moment. So it really requires, discernment, using your intuition, and navigating the way through these different discussions and reaching your own conclusions.
This is the thing that really excites me about this conference, is that there is not the uniformity of expression that is going to be demanded or expected of everyone. No, in fact, the disagreement is actually part of the solution, because yes, certainly we are disunited, we are pulled apart in so many different ways, but if we cannot come together to even talk about our differences, if we can't even model that, then how on earth are we going to progress forward? And these are some incredibly, let's not be naive about it. These are some incredibly difficult problems that we are facing. And there is no, as you say, there's no money for organizations like the World Council for Health from Big Pharma or organizations like that. This isn't, the people's agenda is not going to be as well funded and subsidized and helped along as the opposite side of that. So I think there's a lot of things that need to be hashed out in a serious and thoroughgoing manner. So I'm excited to be taking part, not only as a speaker, but also as a moderator on some of these conversations. And from my perspective, I like the idea of framing each conversation explicitly around that idea of going towards the solution, from climate change to nature nurture, from thought control to free thought, because that, I think, puts the emphasis in the right place, that we should be keeping our mind on where we're going rather than where we've been. I don't know if I have a question in any of that, but I think those are important things to bring out.
It's interesting because we did think and frame it quite carefully, because originally we had, for example, we had, a free thought. What am I saying? A thought control versus free thought. So we had verses, and then we thought, well, we don't just want to put these things against each other and say, well, it's this or that. We wanted to show actually this is where we are, and it's a transition from there to the better world that we're trying to create, or we are creating. And the other thing that you mentioned was how whilst there are all these central themes, and they need to be discussed, because in any one thing, you can see even the way the WHO is framing things, or these globalists are framing things. They'll say we need to work together for the greater good or whatever. Well, in many ways, the better way is also working together for a higher good, but not selling your soul and being stuck in a cage for it. So there's sort of parallels in the narrative, but there's sort of a split. There's the dystopian split, the dystopian way, and there's the better way, and it's a better way. It's not the better way, because there's not going to be one way out of this. But if we all just work, in that, with the mindset and the heart space and intention to create something better than what we've got, that's better for the environment and our children.
Exactly. Well, to my mind, that speaks to the centralization of power and control, which authority figures always want to expand as much as possible, to consolidate as much control as possible. Whereas I think the real resilience comes from decentralized networks of people, from the grassroots up. That is where I think real sustainable, in the real sense, not in the co-opted United Nations agenda sense, but the real sustainability of systems that can actually support human life and flourishing, which presumably should be the goal. Anyway, at any rate, I think that is the right way to frame this emphasis. I guess we could talk a lot about what is going to be talked about, but that seems like it might be... people get the idea by now, and if not, of course, they can go to betterwayconference.org. Let's talk about some of the technical details of how this conference will unfold, how people can attend, because unfortunately, for the purposes of this conversation, most of my audience probably is not in England or will not be able to make it there for this conference. Is there a way for them to participate virtually?
Yes, there is. Now, in actual fact, there were a lot of people that came from all over the world last time. So don't be put off. It's very central. It's easy to get to Bath, and Bath's a very easy city. It's, small and very picturesque. So it's easy to be here. There are advantages to coming in person, because there are workshops that won't be live streamed. So the whole conference is live streamed. And you can get a ticket for not very much for the whole weekend and take part in all the conversations. And if you own a pub or whatever, you can buy a ticket for your entire pub and have all your neighborhood around. We would be delighted if you did do that. But the advantages of coming in person is that we have some workshops during the day, all 3 days, and they range from self-help for vaccine injury, and we have one of those on each days with Dr. Pierre Corey and Dr. Sarah Myhill on the one day, and Dr. Paul Marek and Dr. Tina Piers on the other, or the other way around anyway. So real expert advice and small groups. But also we have like a singing workshop, singing therapy. We have some Qigong. We have digital sovereignty, how to get yourself digitally sovereign, how to, develop a sovereign mind, and those sorts of things. So there's always these really wonderful things you can participate in if you're actually there. But having said that, we are hoping that many thousands will attend online and really get the spirit of things. From a creative point of view, if I could just say, it's not dry and boring. It's a totally different, I would say, concept for a conference, and maybe next year we should call it a festival rather. But we have a lot of creative contributions, and including an epic song that we're going to release, I think, maybe in the next 2 weeks or so, which will, I think, inspire even the stoniest of hearts at this stage.
Well, I'm very interested to hear about that and to hear that, so I will be looking forward to that. All right, I think we will be directing people to betterwayconference.org so they can fill in the blanks on the details of last year's conference and get prepared for this year's conference. But is there anything else that you'd like to let people know before we go?
There is actually, and it's our World Council for Health policy brief on rejecting monopoly power over global public health. This is something you can find on our website. If you go to worldcouncilforhealth.org, about us, there's policy there. So this is it's our very first policy brief. We have 2 more on the way, but this one is highly important, and I urge you to your viewers to download it. It's 45-page analysis of the monopoly power of the pandemic treaty, as well as the amendments to the IHR, and it's put together by political scientists and legal experts. It's really well presented, shall I say, because these documents are very tricky. There's a strain of, for example, there are a number of articles that relate to sovereignty. So if you say, well, we must reject that one over there, number 1, well, there are others that sort of hook you back in. So it's sort of these changes are far-reaching, and they're ubiquitous throughout these documents. So it really needed a good look, sort of, and a sort of integration of the meaning of them. And so I recommend that people look at that document if they want to really understand what's going on, and also print out the amendment document from the WHO website from November, so that you can see, it's, and your viewers probably know this, but a really good way of just describing to people what it's like having a rental agreement with a landlord, for example, and then he comes with a new agreement, and the whole thing is stricken out, and there's a whole lot of new text and pages. It's literally like that, and countries don't actually, governments don't have to sign this. The public's not being invited to participate, and they have far-reaching effects. So please do, if you want to just get a really sensible, easy to digest overview of the implications of this document, so that you can speak with these documents, you can speak with others about it, please do have a look and download our policy brief.
Excellent. I will be linking that in the show notes so people can go and get it. And obviously, I think, again, my audience will probably be primed for that with my regular monthly conversations with Meryl Nass, looking at that particular issue and trying to dissect it. So that policy brief sounds like it will come in very handy for that. But on that note, I think we will leave it there. Dr. Tess Lawrie, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much, James. I look forward to meeting you in person soon.
Likewise.